Yeah, so the other day I was talking about this particular list for Stormcast, and I was thinking, well, I can also show you a little bit how I would deploy this on the table, how to unpack the list in games, and also what my current thoughts are. So my thoughts change from time to time a little bit. I have played a couple of games with this list. Feels like the Vigilors aren't really contributing that much. And I'm really on the edge still about the prosecutors, but I'll get to that later. So the version of the list that I'm currently playing, it's here in Tabletop Simulator, is basically the same list. However, the Vigilors have been kicked out and the prosecutors as well, to change them up for a reinforced unit of concussors. So concussors, they're quite popular at the moment within Stormcast, I believe. It's Extremist Chamber, Move 10, Health 5. It's mostly they've come down a bit in points since the last edition. And the very meta pick right now, I believe, it's the Pastors because they have some shooting and they're even cheaper. Then again, cheapness or price doesn't really matter if you want to just fill the points of your army. Like I could get a cheaper unit, go to 1940 points in my army, or I can take a more expensive unit and go to actually 1980. So in my army, these guys fit quite nicely, and I want to try them out. So I'm going to compare a little bit between them and either Vigilors and Prosecutors, or another small unit and Prosecutors mostly. Also, you see that the manifestation is now a Kronspine. So I used to play the Stormcast manifestations, they're free. Kronspine is 20 points. In this setup, I do have the points for one of the lores. And I feel like with a single cast in your army, Kronspine is quite okay if you have a +1 to cast. So that Knight Arcanum has +1 to cast for manifestations. So basically they're good buddies, we'll say. Also, what I do like about the Kronspine is that it still retained its ability to survive if your opponent banishes it. So that's the wild form. When it's banished, it just gets 7 damage instead of being banished. So you have a lot of reliability in where you place it, and that it will at least stay for a turn. So if you want to, for example, prevent deep strikes from your opponent, you can more reliably cast this in a corner, even if you wanted to, than some other stuff, because your opponent can banish it in the hero phase, still deploying the movement phase. Anyway, so we have this list. Just to go through it, we have Iridan's Cordial Goran, we have the Concussors, we have Lord Terminus with the Quicksilver Draft, and the Legendary Tenacity, which I think is definitely the best for him. We have Reclusions, we have Stormstrike Parados, Kronspine with the Knight Arcanum, Knight Relictor, and Gotrek Gunnison, and a Storm Reach Portal. So let's just grab a random scenario here. There we go. So we got Cyclic Shifts. Okay, set up. So Cyclic Shifts is a scenario. I mean, it's this one. It's this software is quite nifty because you have all the rules, you have all the battle plans, and it's updated quite regularly. So if you have any questions about the software, please contact me as well. I don't know anyone in the team where I can send you to people that are the right programs to install, basically. So we have Cyclic Shifts. You have Place of Power everywhere in the middle. This is the reason that I also take Gotrek, because there's a lot of maps that actually have quite some Place of Power placement in the middle of the board, and you have this ability, Roll Dice, la 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 la. On a 3-up you heal to each friend and enemy unit, which is quite tasty on a 3-up ward save piece. Even for Stormcast, just healing 2 in a random place. You see that I don't have that many models, but most of them have quite a lot of hit points actually by now. Like I have gravitated a little bit more towards the high hit point dense units, and I only have one unit remaining that only has 3 hit points each. So the healing from the Places of Power is actually quite impactful, which is nice on a map like this. So the deployment zones are going to be this one, and the opponents is going to be that one. So we have 22 inches in between. It's always nice to note how much distance you have in between, and capabilities of your opponent movement-wise. So depending on the matchup, you want to put down the Stormreach portal or not. If your opponent has a lot of deep strike, then maybe it's just a charge factor. So against Stormcast, I think I would never put down the portal down. However, against a lot of enemy armies, probably you would. I am going to get my own Stormreach portal, proxy kinda. So the thing I want to avoid is that I have a table and then this thing is at this angle at the edge of my table. So I would prefer to have something that is like less high, or at least doesn't block my movement in terms of my arms around the table as much as this thing does. So I'll go for something less tall and just tell my opponent that he can always see it at all times if he wants to, just to get around the rules conundrums. So Stormreach portal, usually centrally, so that people can get back to it. Like I could put it in a corner, but then basically I might as well not put it down unless I really want to go for a defensive play. Cyclic shift does impact this a little bit. Like you could say, okay, I just want to tag my objective and go through the portal. But then again, if you place it here, then you can also still start. I'm just taking a random guy now. Start on the objective, do a run, which at least gives you 6, and then you're probably already within 6. This is 3 inches of me, this is 9. So this would be quite an okay place. You could put it a little bit to the side maybe. Okay, so portal down, and then I have 5 drops. So the advantage of that is that I also have drops that are not meaningful at all, or they don't give information to my opponent. Most notably the Nitrocanum and the Nitrolictor. So Nitrolictor is the one that I would put down mostly as a first drop, because he can vanish as a priest, sure. So then if my opponent casts anything within 30 inches of him, I can vanish it. Ideally, I want to near the Stormreach portal being able to boost my troops and out of threat range of my opponent. So I think I would put him here. So just to go over everything that goes through my head now. It's priest that has to be able to boost my troops in a 12-inch range. So basically this is my bubble that I can boost with blast weapons. And that is the only prayer that he really can do. And translocate, but well, translocate, obviously. So that is that's where he can go, and then I can use Eridan to get another bubble. I don't think she has the 12. She has the 12-inch bubble. So to have another bubble to just cover basically the entire field. I prefer to have the Nitrolictor close to the portal and not Eridan, because Eridan cannot go through. Anyway, so I could also put him actually on the objective here. Question is whether it's important enough or not. I mean, if I do, then I do lose a little bit my 12-inch aura at the start of the game. But first turn I don't really use it, so maybe it's even better to just put him here and use him to tag the objective. Then my opponent will drop most times not that much, sometimes half of the army. I don't really have to look at that yet, because I can just put down my Knight Arcanum. So my Knight Arcanum usually goes to a spot where he starts the battle outside of 30 of my opponent, so I can cast my Corn Spine without being hampered, and then to a spot where I could potentially go to an objective. So in cyclic shifts, or in cyclic shifts, it's also really tempting actually to have someone just deploy up to the line here, because this distance is quite small, it's only 2 inches. So on a redeploy on a 2-up, you do get it. So I think my opponent should also do this, because if you have more objectives than your opponent, then you get extra points. So if you do this, then you can deny your opponent getting these 2 extra points on a 2-up. Because it's quite unlikely that your opponent will try to score these first time. An advantage or a disadvantage of this as a second drop is that you tell your opponent you can do this, so it's actually better to do this with another unit. And I do have sufficient units in my army to do this, so I might as well keep my Night Arcanum also close to the portal. And just, let's see, 11 inches is here, so I can still go out a little bit. And just deploy it like this. And then my opponent drops a bit more. I have my information that I need, but I do have still a Gotrek. So Gotrek generally wants to go in the middle of the board. Gotrek cannot be redeployed, reshuffled, reset up or anything. He wants to generally just deploy on the line and behind some kind of terrain, so that I still have 2 directions that I can go to, but my opponent does not know which direction I go for yet. So it might even be better to just put him here. Pop. Oh, I did change something with the objectives. I don't know how I did that. Total shifts. Well, I guess we. Oh dear. So the software is being a little bit interesting. Cyclic shifts is. Sorry about that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're back to cyclic shift. I don't have to go on the objective because I still have more units that can come in and drop. And also, I only have to be there at the end of my turn unless I want to deny my opponent's scoring, basically. So Gotrek generally wants to be behind one piece of terrain so I can still choose where to go, but I can respond to my opponent. In this map, there is also an option that my opponent really tries to castle up. Generally, I think with this map you have a bit of a vector where you split the board like this and you fight like this. Or you would want to maybe do it like this. So with these scenarios, you usually have the home objectives that people take, and then you have an extra objective that people go for. And depending on that, you actually divide up the board. So there's either this is a very comfortable play because this objective is only very it's still very close to your own opponent. So most likely, most scenarios you will end up playing this way. Also because the terrain, this line really divides up the field. So you have a lot of, well, basically defensive capabilities because enemy units cannot get through. Whereas if you take it this way, then you have a lot of options to go through and advance through the forest. Okay, so what else do we have? I'll just take a little bit of water. So next thing would be a drop where we actually put some stuff on the table. The thing is though that we still play Stormcast. So we still play Stormcast, so we do have stuff that goes in the heavens. So my reclusions and terminals generally go in the heavens. Oh, this got properly bunched up there. But there is a bit of an exception. So right now, I would generally, in most missions, most board states, I would put down the Stormcast, the Stormstrike Paladors. So the Stormstrike Paladors are mobile enough to get involved in the fight later in the game still, if you deploy them on the flank, because they have the 12-inch move. They're also a great pinning unit for the first turn of the game, mostly because they cost 190 points, which is not that much. I can go up till that block. Flank. So, as I said, they cost 190 points, so they do have the cost that enables you to just sacrifice them without really being bothered about it. So they go about there. In objectives where you only 18 inches away from each other. I think this is the difference between Stormstrike Paladors and Vanguard Paladors. Like the Vanguard Paladors have run and charge and shoot and retreat. So you can auto run them first turn to go 18 inches, and then on this type of map you will have a 4-inch charge first turn if you spend a command point for the auto run. Whereas Stormstrike Paladors, they only go 12. Well, only go 12. So they go 12, and then in this map you have a 10-inch charge afterwards, which makes it unreliable. So you won't. I wouldn't bank on that, but I mean, people are different. Some people would. But on a 18-inch separation map, you will have a 6-inch charge first turn of the game, which is perfectly fine. I don't think it's worth the 50 points to upgrade to get around and charge in this. Mostly because I use them generally to tag and just try to make sure that my opponent can't respond as much as they like to, because they don't generally have retreat and charge from everything. And when I send in these Paladors with Finest Hour with an all-out defense against the unit of my opponent that strikes the hardest, they generally survive. So I can tag my opponent and just make them not be able to respond. So they deploy on a place where they can do the 2-inch redeploy on the objective in case my opponent wants to go first. And then the last drop would be one of these. So with this list, because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things, I can only put 3 things in the sky. I would still just deploy Aerodan, probably just center, because I don't really know where I want to go yet, whether maybe a little bit to the left. But this would more or less be it. And then your opponent is looking at basically a board that is quite barren. Like I do have my Gotrek. Gotrek is just in the middle of the field, close to an obstacle, so he is obscured. I believe. Cover impossible. No, don't think so. So it's a area terrain. Obstacle is obscured, I believe. I mean, this is somewhere in this, in this thing. So yeah, this would be one scenario, and then I'll talk about the other scenarios a bit later. So what we have in Deep Strike now are the concussors and the terminals and the reclusions. This army specifically does not have any tools to reduce deep strike distance, so I don't really know where my concussors have to be yet, so I'd rather just not deploy them yet, because generally my opponent will not give me or move up so far that it would be possible with concussors to get a reliable charge after a 10-inch move. So you could also argue, okay, Aerodan doesn't go on. I do have my concussors. I do have my concussors, like more or less here, I guess. Could have been a bit more smart in that case with Gotrek at the start. If you see that your opponent is deploying some stuff that has some threat range but not too much, you can deploy your concussors here in a safe spot and basically zone out, because they can move 10 inches and then charge afterwards. So you can threaten this objective, for example. I shouldn't shuffle up my miniatures apparently, because they just do this all the time. Okay. Yeah, so that would be one scenario again. And then how does the first turn look? So generally you want to put the reclusions first turn down in a choke point of the map where they can threaten an enemy objective. So best way to counter reclusions, counter Stormcast, if I deploy like this, is overextend yourself, which is what people generally do not want to do, and Gotrek does deny this quite a bit. So if my opponent has preferably a small scouting unit or whatever, just put here, then my reclusions can only, like this would be the scouting unit, my reclusions could only go here. And that is pretty useless to me. So ideally I want to just put these in the middle of the field here. Terminals in the middle, these guys around. So this is the standard setup with reclusions, just a nice circle. If anyone attacks reclusions, terminals is also in combat. and you cannot pass in either of these directions because the distance is just too small. You could also say, well, I'll just completely block it off so that no small model can go through. You can play a little bit around with where the terminals goes because you can see that you have to close here, so you can go probably here. So this is the 3-inch. You have to do a 2.5-inch bubble basically because enemies only have to be within half an inch for a charge, so they can stop within half an inch and then say, "Oh, your terminals is not within combat range." So just to elaborate on that, if I have my reclusion there and my enemy is going to charge me, then they can go here, because this is still within half an inch. I have been charged. I would be fully within 3 of the terminals, but that's not good enough. So we have reclusions in the middle, all nice and pretty. And then basically you start to think about the rest of your list. So the reason why I would put the reclusions here, basically as far up as possible, would be to zone this objective, try to go for it on the long term, depending on the damage output of my opponent. In a one-on-one fight, if my opponent does not have anti-strike first tech, the reclusions win out in terms of point efficiency. So that means that any trade that my opponent wants to do with reclusions is generally in my favor. So I might lose them, but my opponent has to invest way too much to get there. Now a very good interaction here is that Gotrek can then auto run 10 inches and also get there if my opponent really has some damage output. And then the cheeky thing is that his base is actually quite small, so you can put him all the way here. The reclusion's a little bit back, but make just a little path for your Gotrek. So in this case, basically monsters cannot charge Gotrek, but I can countercharge if I want to. And if you do it right, then you can even say, well, only on my turns you can get within 3 inches of Gotrek. There's all kinds of little details here. This is quite alright. Like, my opponent can still charge this reclusion. So if my opponent were to charge here, for example, that's a bit of a downside for me because Gotrek has a very long counter charge. However, if my opponent only sends in one piece, then I'm quite confident that reclusions can handle most of the single pieces that they can face. But as you can see here, it's like a 4-inch to get there. So if my opponent puts something there, then Gotrek has an easy counter charge. If you're inclined to, you can even include Gotrek in this circle so that if people want to attack Gotrek, same applies as to the reclusions. All terminals will be in combat and Gotrek, and then they can activate first before Gotrek. This is really a powerhouse combination that is very difficult to shift. Otherwise, Gotrek can just go on his own, be obscured by the Blaze of Power because they gave obscuring as well, and heal D3 every single turn. So the funny thing is also that Gotrek can activate, or any hero can activate Blaze of Power for healing. If you roll the 3+, every unit within 6 inches of this heals D2. So I don't even need Gotrek to be within 3 inches to activate it. I just need him to be within 6 inches and have another hero be in 3 inches. And that makes Gotrek quite alright, yes. Yeah. So first turn. I'm talking quite a lot, haven't I? So we have the reclusions that went there. The Stormstrike Powders, if my opponent gives me the first turn, I'm just gonna go there. Out of threat range of my opponent, preferably, but within threat range to counter strike. Iridan, depending on deep strikes of my opponent, I would. Well, I'll anyway cast Conspine, hopefully get it. If I do get it, it zones out. Enemy teleports. If it doesn't, then I would just use the Night Arcanum basically. So the Night Arcanum goes here, the Iridan goes probably here-ish, depending on whether my opponent has some kind of threat to go through the reclusions into Iridan or not. Gotrek, most matchups, I think he would just end up going here more or less. Probably with an auto run, so some extra movement. And the Night Electro can just run to the portal and get teleported. For example, to here. If I make a little cheeky corner, I can even go there and then give the -1 ward out. It's not very useful right now, but it is useful to have the blessed weapons, Vector, and the translocation. Now we still have the concussors. So concussors are, I think they're a counter charge unit in the sense that I don't want to activate them on my turn. That's not true. I want to activate them on my turn, but not on the opponent's turn. So I don't want to spend the 2 CP to counter charge with the command, but I want to set up the game so that I can charge with the next turn. So Gotrek is quite good here. Very close to the terrain, so that there's not that many enemies that can get to him, basically. So if you have a unit of 20 Chaos Warriors or something, only this circle around him could strike, which would be about 10, and that he will survive, generally. So then these guys can just chill out here, probably, maybe center, depending on what the opponent is bringing. You could even say, well, if my opponent piles in or attacks me, it's not even that bad, but then you would want to probably set them up more in a line kind of formation so that all of them can pile in if your opponent wants to get closer. So this could be a possible scenario here. If your opponent has Deep Strike, you can opt to not teleport this guy. I think he's more valuable than the Night Arcanum in this setup. So you would run this guy here, you would go with the Night Arcanum, teleporting to zone out the objective. And then have this as a turn 1 board state. So now your opponent is ready to strike somewhere. Can go into the reclusions. Then he will have to bear reclusions. Can go into Gotrek, has to bear Gotrek. These are good situations for you as a Stormcast player. So this assumes that your opponent does not have any shooting now. Reclusions do very intense shooting, they do die. So against a lot of shooting you might want to have the places of power a bit more, because you can make sure that you are not going to be able to be targeted. If your opponent does go in, you can counter charge with the concussors, or just even save the CP and go for the next turn to get into your opponent. If your opponent does not go in, I would redeploy Gotrek so he gets closer. And otherwise, yeah, this is basically it. How does the next turn look then? Probably just a big fight around these points. Most people tend to go in, and then some of this stuff will survive. Eridan can go in, obviously. These guys can go in wherever you want, left, right. Here's more space, depending on how many reclusions died. You can go to that side as well. You have your support still here. This is perfect for doing little skirmishes with support units. And that is basically it. You have a lot of damage coming out of this with the double activation of Gotrek, with the concussors, reclusions, Eridan. So you play quite a fair game in the end of just having a line, setting up your pieces, inviting the enemy and counter-punching, and then trying to finish it off with some tricks like power through and stuff. And yeah, this is basically how I would play this. Then later in the game you have some units that died, then the teleports really start to kick in. So the Night Electro can teleport either himself or another unit out of combat, in combat, to a more useful place. And once per game, you will likely, if the game is going well, you will likely get a replacement unit of the Stormstrike Powders. If you feel like you're losing out on the grind, you will probably take 2 concussors back if they have died already. to give you another two concussors training. So yeah, I was gonna tell about how I would change my tactics and deployment, but I'll keep that to another video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you then next time.